Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy, would you like to speak on House Bill 5200?
Yes, all right. So this is a bill that I also sponsored for the Department of Business Regulation, and it deals with insurance data security. What we're trying to do is to adopt the current National Association of Insurance Commissioners Model Act dealing with data security. I think if you ask just about anybody on the committee, many of you, just as I have been, has seen our data somehow been compromised in recent years. And whether that is through a breach with the company or however it occurred, in the end, it causes a great deal of problems. So this particular piece of legislation was worked on for over 2 years by the NEIC. They held a number of hearings on it. Rhode Island was very, very much involved with the creation of this act and participated as part of the drafting group. I think this is something that goes a long ways towards protecting our constituents in the future. While in most cases these data breaches have occurred with big companies out there, whether it's banks or insurers or whoever they may be, we also want to make sure that the smaller companies out there are equally protecting our important data that they have before them. So with that, I sponsored this bill on behalf of the Department of Business Regulation. I know that there will be some of the testimony that was provided in written form where people are seeking amendments, but I think we have to move forward with adopting something to protect our data, whether it's with a big company or whether it's with a smaller company.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the sponsor? Whip Chippendale.
Thank you, Chairman. Rep. Kennedy, this is an extremely complicated and long bill, so obviously I'm not able to consume the entire thing right here. I suspect you had model legislation?
Yes, as I said, this is a model from the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So they refer to it as the Model Data Security Act.
So it's fairly vetted for whatever reason, and it's a good starting point, and any amendments that are being suggested could certainly be considered at a future point. But your point is that without this right now, or some level of protection, we're exposed. So we ought to adopt this.
Correct.
Okay.
And I will tell you, Whip, Beth Dwyer, who will be speaking on behalf of the Department of Business Regulation, she was very involved with the working group at the NEIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Within this process, Beth is open to meeting with anyone who has any concerns about the bill in order to make the necessary changes. Obviously, we don't want to water the bill down so much that it doesn't accomplish what we want, which is to protect your data and to protect my data.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, thank you. Elizabeth Dwyer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, I thank Rep. Kennedy for sponsoring this bill, and I think he did an excellent job in summarizing it. I was vice chair of the national committee that drafted this, and what this bill is trying to do is be belt and suspenders around some of the protections we have for consumers, but really target insurance companies. So right now we have the AG bill that applies to all businesses. We also have on insurance examination, so most of you know that my department does audits of our domestic insurers, and we check to make sure their cybersecurity programs are appropriate, and every other state does that as well. But this is the belt and suspenders, again, around that. It gives additional protections. It puts out recommendations specific to insurance, and it provides for notification to my office so that we can do as best a job as we can to help consumers when there has been a breach. It has been adopted by 11 other states, and it's pending in the state of Maine. And as Rep. Kennedy said, there are a number of people who have offered objections, and I plan on virtually meeting with all of them to see if we can come to some compromise that protects consumers and addresses some of their issues. I will mention that there is one person who commented who I do not have contact information for, and if I could get contact information from that individual, I would include him as well, and I can take any questions.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you. I know, Elizabeth, you're on one more bill. We have two more witnesses on this bill, so we're going to go to our next witness, Frank O'Brien from the APCIA. Frank, you are before the House Committee on Corporations. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and once again, for the record, Frank O'Brien with APCIA, and I want to thank both Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy and Superintendent Dwyer for putting this particular piece of legislation before the committee. Data security is a priority issue for us in the insurance industry, and because it is, insurers devote considerable resources to protecting data, information systems, and consumer trust. To that end, we support policy efforts that balance corporate responsibility with appropriate regulatory oversight and ultimately enhance consumer protections. The NAIC model law, of which House 5200 is a Rhode Island version, is just such a bill. As the superintendent mentioned, it has already been passed in 11 states over the last couple of years, including Connecticut, and we expect that it will be passed by your colleagues in the state of Maine by the time their legislative session ends. We do not object to the bill. We do, however, have several technical changes that we believe need to be made, several clarifications, a couple of corrections. We've already spoken with Superintendent Dwyer, and we'll be meeting with her. These concerns range from minor technical things, such as clarifying the definition of commissioner in the bill so to make sure it includes the superintendent, clarifying various reporting requirements and timeframes, and setting a reasonable effective date. So, in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, APCIA has been in conversation with the superintendent this year, as we have over the past several years, and we believe, as far as our organization is concerned, we're optimistic about reaching a successful conclusion and being able to provide the committee with a suggested sub-A. And we believe, and we are in complete agreement with Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy's statement that this is a particular piece of legislation that we should be moving forward on. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for Frank? Hearing none. Thank you for your testimony, Frank. Next up, we have Randall Rose. Mr. Rose, you are before the House Committee on Corporations. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Let me just turn off my broadcast here. Okay, so you don't get an echo. Thank you. So I'm speaking against the bill, against this bill on cybersecurity for insurers. To be blunt, this bill has virtually no concrete requirements for insurers that will protect consumers against data breaches. It leaves far too much to the discretion of the insurers, and it's very difficult it makes it difficult to enforce specific standards about cybersecurity practices on an insurer who doesn't want to. The bill is, I'll list a number of weak points of the bill. First of all, the bill leaves it up to the insurer itself to decide what the risks faced by the insurer are. So the insurer has sole responsibility for putting together a risk assessment. Then the specific security measures that the insurer has to implement are left to according to the bill, the specific security measures that the insurer has to implement depend on that risk assessment that was made by the insurer themselves. So if the insurer decides there are relatively few risks, the insurer can cite that as justification for having fewer security measures, or the insurer may decide that they, in their risk assessment, that they face a lot of risks. But even if they decide in their be clear in their risk assessment that they face a lot of risks, there's not any tight language in the bill that says you have to implement this particular security measure if you face this level of risk. Furthermore, if there is a hacking event or other unauthorized access, the insurer under this bill has the discretion to determine that no one actually used the unauthorized access data. So if you look at the definition of cybersecurity event in this bill, if there's an event when somebody accessed information without authorization, the insurer can just say, we determine that nobody actually used that unlawfully accessed data. Therefore, we are not declaring this as a cybersecurity event. And that's completely allowed under the bill. Nothing is a cybersecurity event if the insurer declares in its own discretion that nobody actually used the data.
Thank you.
So those are serious flaws in the bill. The one place where the bill is very careful to impose strict language is that it's very insistent, repetitive, and strict in saying that any information about the current state of the insurer's security practice that's gathered pursuant to the bill cannot be used in a lawsuit against the insurer by consumers who are being harmed.
Thank you. Thank you, Randall. If there's anything additional, you feel free to submit written testimony to the committee.
Can I suggest some changes?
You absolutely can submit some written testimony suggesting changes, so we'd look forward to reviewing them. But in the 3 minutes testimony is up, and I would just ask, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Are there any questions for Randall Rose? Seeing that there's none, thank you, Randall. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 5200. I will say that there was written testimony from Terry Martian from the Independent Insurance Agents of Rhode Island against, as well as Angel Lopez against. So that concludes the testimony on House Bill 5200.